how it's impacting our public service and how it's impacting the majority of how we do things within our country. And the fact that the majority of it is a fair, equitable process with a lot of accountability and a lot of transparency that we go through. So maybe you can reflect on how all of the disinformation being pumped out by the Conservatives on our public service is impacting our public service right now in the procurement process.
Honestly, I'm not going to comment on that. To be fair, what I could say is that sadly, when there's a finding of this nature, this type of finding through an audit, it will shake the system, right? And that's normal. So, people, like I said earlier, a lot of people do a fantastic job and they've built a great reputation. But when something like this is found, you need to shake the system up. And you need to make sure that you go above and beyond to make sure that, we could rebuild back trust in our processes and our controls.
I really appreciate you said that, because I think that as we continue, there is a continuing diminishing of lack of trust within our public institutions. And when things like this happen, it really gets to that crux of that trust and just shatters it to the ground. So I hope that we can work together and that TBS and all of our government departments can ensure that we are spending taxpayer dollars in a responsible fashion. But just with respect to how your department operates, and I'm sure you have reflections on many other departments as well, how important is it that we fund departments properly so that they are able to conduct the public service that we require them to? And I know that the Conservatives have always voted against increasing funding for our public service, but I would really like for you to help us understand why that's important.
Well, I mean, obviously financial resources are important if you're going to deliver on programs. That's so you need, but like I said before, departments are allocated with a budget and they have to make decisions as to how they're going to utilize these resources to deliver in the most effective way their programs. And they have to distribute that funding in a way that they're going to have, the right controls in place and sound foundation. So again, I come from the world of internal services, and I always vouch that important to also make sure that these activities are well funded, because they become your foundation, right? If your foundation starts to crack, you will have issues. But again, I come back to the fact that departments are accountable to manage the funding that are provided to them and to make the best decisions possible on how they're going to utilize financial resources. But financial resources, like human resource or anything else, are key to being able to deliver on what you need to deliver on.
Thank you very much. Suivant, c'est Madame Secrétaire Desgagnés pour 2 minutes 30 secondes, s'il vous plaît.
Parfait, merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rochon. I have a very quick question for you, if I may. Now, hypothetically speaking, of course, after an employee has deleted an email, how long does that email remain in the cloud, and for what period can one recover such an email? Response: normally you can recover that kind of email for quite some time. How much time is that exactly? Response: I can't say with precision. It depends on the server, on the cloud itself. Question: well, at CBSA, for example, hypothetically speaking, of course, after you delete an email, for how long? You know the infrastructure at the CBSA. Response: well, that'd be a good question for Shared Services Canada that maintains a cloud. Shared Services can probably give you a more precise answer than I can. Now, I assume, under normal circumstances, that an email would be kept for 6 months. We did ask the question of Shared Services, and they still haven't answered that question. Curiously, they don't know, and yet it's their bailiwick. They don't know. But now, to come back to non-competitive contracts, willing buyer, willing seller, let's take a step back. And those sole source contracts accounted for about 1% of contracts in the early 2000s. And yet, in 2015, it was 18%. went through the roof, and in the last couple of years, it's now a quarter of, or rather a third of contracts. Is this because there's less competition, that there has to be willing buyer, willing seller contracts? There was the pandemic, of course, in 2023, but is it something that you monitor, Mr. Huppé? Response. Accountability is the purview of the contracting authority. Of course, these things are monitored. Based on my experience, when I was at a number of departments, when we engaged in proactive disclosure for those contracts, the Deputy Minister did ask those kinds of questions as a rule of thumb, and we tried to define whether or not there was a problem in terms of the use of non-competitive contracts. But that's one of the challenges in terms of oversight that the department engages in. But do you think that it was done? This kind of thing went through the roof over recent years. Is this something that still occurs, this kind of oversight, or is there less and less oversight? Response. I don't have any data in respect of that. Obviously, during the pandemic, those tools, i.e. sole source contracts, were used in a meaningful and substantive manner, but I can't really say. But generally speaking, what we do look for is a competitive process. Question, shouldn't you have that data? There's never been a worse year in terms of non-competitive contracts than 2023, and it's a post-pandemic year. Shouldn't this kind of analysis be done systematically? Well, when you referred to justifications for using sole source contracting, well, isn't it your responsibility? Doesn't the buck stop with you?
The floor for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And again, thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today. Mr. Sean, I'm going to ask you some questions, please. I understand that the committee heard testimony yesterday from Danny Richards, who is, of course, the president of the Association of Canadian Financial Officers. In his testimony, he said that when outside consultants and firms are hired, their employees are still left to do most of the work, as those consultants come to the public service employees for their work to be verified and their final reports to be done. This was something that the union representing the CBSA officers presented on Arrive Can, saying that they frequently were required to act as technical support. And I guess, I hear that, and I'd like you to clarify for the committee, is it the position of the government of Canada that we should be overpaying for consultants and contracts and then simultaneously underpaying the unionized workers who then also administer and verify the final products and the reports? And I guess perhaps you could even comment a little bit on whether or not you think it's fair that the expert members of our public service unions are frequently told that there's no more money to pay their wages, and then they are left with the residual work of companies who have made these millions and millions of dollars in contracts.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I'll revert back to referring to the Directive on Digital Talent that I think we put in place in April 2023. And I will note that we put that in place with the input and ongoing engagement of the Professional Institute of the Public Service of Canada, PIPSI, which is, of course, the union that represents one of the largest union, if I'm not mistaken, in Canada, with over 70,000 members. That being said, to answer your question specifically, I think what we're endeavoring to do, we know that we have a dependency. We're trying to get off that dependency. It's difficult because, as I mentioned earlier, there's a significant talent deficit in technology, and that's not just with the federal public service. It's happening everywhere. So we're looking for ways and putting in place tools to facilitate not just recruitment and retention, but development and tools to be able to deconflict and make sure that we don't become dependent, as it seems was the case here, on outside contracting. Outside contracting, I want to be clear, is still going to be needed, but it should be clear as to when it is justified, and the directive now puts in place guidance so that as departments and agencies go out and seek that contract help, they're actually checking in with that justification, and there are other eyes on it to confirm that. And just recently,
and I know I'm out of time, and I hate to interrupt you, but I do want to just say that this clearly, the talent deficiency clearly would stem from the fact that there have been massive cuts to the to the public sector by both the Liberal and Conservative governments, and fixing it after the fact is actually far more expensive than not having broken this problem.
Thank you, Ms. McPherson. Do you have a brief reply, Mr. Lachon? That was more of a statement, but very good then. Thank you very much. Turn now to Mr. Genuis. You have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. I am very struck by the comments of my Liberal colleague regarding lack of trust in public institutions, as if public institutions trust in public institutions can be disconnected from an evaluation of their conduct. I think public institutions have to earn trust. Now, the Arrive scandal is an earth-shattering scandal. Massive.
Just 1 second,
Point
Mr.
of order,
Genuis.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Ms. Khalid, your point of order is?
When Conservative colleagues call it an Arrive scam instead of an Arrive cam app,
Ms. Khalid, that is
impacting the public trust. That is the crux of what I was trying to get
Ms.
at.
Khalid, that is not a point of order. That is a term we're hearing both in this committee room, but also throughout Parliament Hill. Mr. Genuis, you have the floor. 4 minutes and 40 seconds, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, trigger warning, my comments will use the word Arrive scam. Arrive scam is impacting public trust because it's an earth-shattering scandal. Massive cost overruns, rigged processes, double-dipping, disappearing records, over 10,000 Canadians incorrectly sent into quarantine, deleted emails, senior public servants accusing each other of perjury, multiple points of conduct that are likely criminal. Yes, this is impacting public trust. The public will only trust institutions when and to the extent that those institutions actually earn their trust. So it's pretty rich for Liberals like Ms. Khalid to talk about the need for public trust in institutions when they have presided over a massive decline in the effectiveness and the trustworthiness of public institutions and done nothing about it.
Mr. Genuis, just now, Ms. Khalid, you are. No, you're not the next speaker, but go ahead. You have a point of order. It's a point of order, not a rebuttal.
I'd appreciate if Mr. Genuis did not try to malign me. I've already been dealing with a lot of hate mail and a lot of threats in my office based on what the Conservatives have done. I would appreciate if he didn't put another target on my back.
Thank you, Ms. Khalid. Mr. Genuis, you have 3 minutes and 50 seconds. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I would encourage Canadians who contact the offices of government members to be respectful, polite, and gracious, and also to criticize in a respectful and principled way the profound failures of this government. And I don't think there is anything wrong with criticizing the actions or conduct of members that merit that criticism in this Arrive scam scandal. A quick question for Mr. Houpe. A lot clearly went wrong with the Arrive scan. You said we don't need new rules. Procurement is complex enough. I think it's too complex, actually, and the problem we have is that this government builds highly complex systems that end up masking corruption or direct accountability. But it seems like you set up a false choice, which is either the system stays as it is, or we add additional rules that make it more complex. Isn't the alternative to fix the system so that it's simpler and has clear lines of accountability so that we can actually identify and hold accountable individuals who engage in corrupt action?
So we're always looking to improve on the system. I think that would be a mistake not to do that. In this particular case, my comments were to the effect that, as the Auditor General mentioned, the rules were not followed here. So that's different than, I've got 30 years experience building a bunch of red tape on top of processes because there's something bad that happened is, in my mind, not the solution here. The problem is that we need to make sure that the compliance of the rules gets respected.
Right.
So that's what the actions will be.
I agree with you that making the system more complex isn't the solution. We need the system to be clear, to work, to hold people accountable for what they've done wrong. But that does mean pretty substantial changes, including changes in leadership. Now, I want to put a fine point on this. Your department, Treasury Board, actually sends the checks for ArriveCan, right?